need to get the channels sorted.
Voilà, donc comme la dernière fois, on a un service d'interprétation. Est-ce que ça avait marché pour tout le monde ou est-ce que quelqu'un avait eu un souci? Peut-être Serge peut expliquer à nouveau brièvement.
D'accord, merci. Bonjour
Merci,
à tout le monde,
Serge.
mesdames et messieurs. Je suis très ravi d'être avec vous. Je suis Serge Dali, interprète de téléconférence et aujourd'hui, nous allons travailler ensemble lors de ce webinaire. Alors, vous avez une option interprétation qui est disponible parce que la plupart des modérateurs pourront s'exprimer soit en anglais ou en français. Pareil pour les différents participants. Donc, en bas de l'écran, normalement, vous avez une icône qui ressemble à un globe, hein, comme le globe terrestre. Et c'est écrit juste en bas « Interprétation ». Donc, vous cliquez dessus et vous choisissez « French », donc pour français. Et une fois que vous choisissez « Français », n'oubliez pas de couper l'audio original. Donc, vous coupez l'audio original et vous choisissez « Français » et vous allez entendre l'interprétation en français. So, I would like now to make the same announcement in English. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are on the globe. And today there will be simultaneous interpretation available. You just have to look on your screen. There is a globe icon and it's written interpretation. You just click on that icon and you will be able to see English and French. So you select English, you click on mute original audio, and you will hear the interpretation in English anytime somebody is speaking French on the floor. So thank you so much. Once again, my name is Serge Dali. If you have any challenge with the interpretation, feel free to send me a message in the chat box, or you can contact any of the moderators and they will contact me. Thank you so much.
Oui. Pardon. Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Voilà, Émilie, donc j'en ai fini et la parole est à vous.
Merci beaucoup, merci Serge. Eh bien, bienvenue à tous à nouveau donc à ce deuxième webinaire qui va se focaliser aujourd'hui sur les preuves et les processus politiques. Donc, juste un petit sondage. Je sais que la dernière fois, on avait eu un petit peu de cafouillage. J'espère qu'aujourd'hui, ça va marcher. Donc, on voudrait savoir comment vous vous sentez aujourd'hui. Si vous pouvez cliquer sur la réponse, est-ce que vous êtes en pleine forme? Est-ce que ça va très bien? Est-ce qu'on ne se plaint pas? Est-ce que vous êtes un peu endormi ou un peu lent? Donc, si vous pouviez répondre à notre petit sondage, ça serait magnifique. OK, je vois qu'il y a pas mal de gens en pleine forme, aussi très bien. Ah, un ou deux un peu endormis. On se demande si c'est notre facilitatrice américaine ou il est très tôt. Donc, merci beaucoup pour vos réponses. C'est bien de voir qu'on se sent bien aujourd'hui. Mickey, on va peut-être demander le deuxième. Donc, juste pour avoir une idée de quel projet pays est représenté aujourd'hui, est-ce que vous pouvez sélectionner si vous êtes du Burkina Faso, Burundi, Niger, Sénégal? On voit, OK. On a une forte représentation des Burkinabés. Merci, mais on a quand même des représentants de tous les pays. Donc, merci beaucoup. Et puis, une dernière question pour vous.
Thank you very much. We have the last question. With respect to your role on the program, can you tell us what category, which corresponds better? Is it project coordination, or is it monitoring? Do you represent a ministry? Are you a partner to the project? I can see there's a lot of project coordination personnel, as well as monitoring and evaluation staff, as well as field agent. Thank you very much for your answers. I see a lot of people with experience, which is quite interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you for your feedbacks. It's very interesting to have an idea of the audience for this meeting. I would like to recall our training team with Constance. Sabrina is not here today, but we have Nick with us and myself. All right, with respect to our process in terms of training, we conducted some interviews. The interpreter is an English channel because the speaker is speaking English. Please ask the participant to choose the French channel, please. Thank you. The interpreter is interpreting into English because Emily is speaking French. Kindly tell the participant to be in French. So we did the first training. And today we have the second part of the training, which is based on proofs and political processes. Before we start, this is a short question to answer and to say that there was a method or a tool which was addressed in the course of the first webinar that you consider to put into practice or to implement. Kindly answer on the dialogue or the chat box. Do you think there's a tool that is likely to be implemented? Kindly answer on the chat box. And don't hesitate, if it takes a bit of your minutes, you can fill it on the chat box. Now, this is just a reminder of the various objectives. The first one is to introduce a systematic approach in order to feed decisions and policies with an inclusive process called shared. Then we also have methods adjusted to the program with respect to feedbacks from interviews, and then a lesson learning process from various countries in order to strengthen stakeholders' engagement. And then there we have also the process of countries' programs in order to influence policies. Today, our process is the following. We have the first session on the power dynamics. The second one is on advocacy with various engagement sessions. That is the reason why I would like to encourage you to use the chat box for comments and questions. And then we have the third session, which is based on proofs or evidence and influence, together with communication in policy dialogues. Before we conduct group works, we are going to divide ourselves into two teams, two working groups, and then we will look at the various involvements, potential involvements or implications of your country projects, and then we do an assessment together with the training. As I said, let's recall the principles. The first one is engagements, interactions. Don't hesitate to raise your hand, to ask questions on the chat box. Today, as far as our program is concerned, which is based on mainly evidence and political process, we will look at power dynamic negotiations, visioning, and then we have the multi-level objectives, and then the session on advocacy, before we end the third session, which is based on communication and evidence mainstreaming in policy processes. This is another survey as per your experience. Mika, can I have the survey number 4? Thank you. As per your experience in planning and decision making, can you tell if there was a major participation of stakeholders in these decisions? And then we want to know whether you agree. No, if you don't agree, if you are not totally, if you agree, if you strongly agree, if you're neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. Your experience in planning and decision taking, can you confirm that there is a greater participation of decision makers? Thank you. I can see that agree is almost 60%. I have various ideas. Let's wait a while. This is really your experience. Do you think we have greater participation or greater involvement of stakeholders in your project? So I can see that we have different ideas. I'm sorry, we won't have time to really explore the reasons behind it. However, we will follow up later on. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, let's just take a reminder of various countries in the course of which we look at objectives, activities, the needs of various countries with respect to how to use shared tools in order to respond to context challenges. This is another reminder. Thank you very much for using the chat box in order to discuss at any time and to raise your hand if possible. Now, the first session was based on power dynamics. This is what we're going to talk about right now. Kindly give me the floor. Let me give the floor to Constance. Constance, can you check the floor and share your screen?
Thank you so much, Emily. And good afternoon to everyone. If I can get this to, yes, full screen. Yes, we're very excited to make the link between the training we did in the first session around relationship building, the multi-stakeholder platforms, and the deepening of relationships, and now take the first part of this session around the dynamics of power. So just to get us started, power dynamics came up quite a bit in our conversations, but predominantly around getting interests to be aligned and to build consensus around different objectives, aspirations, and visions, and to ensure that we have functioning stakeholder dynamics for the project as well as beyond the project lifetime.
Constance,
So,
just
yes?
a moment. It's showing in a slideshow, so we can see all the slides.
Thank you so much, Mika. I don't know why that is, but I'll see what I can do. I think it has to do with the screen. I did this last time, didn't I? Had difficulty, huh? Let me see if I can bring it here. I apologize for the delay.
Would you like me to share, Constance?
I think I've got it. Let me just check. Desktop 2, yes. And it just needs to come to full screen so you don't have all the little notes. Can you tell me if this is satisfactory or you're still seeing everything?
No, we can see all the notes.
I don't understand why. So I will end my show and invite someone to share their screen. I apologize.
Mika, can you share yours so I do the...
Yes, just one
I'll check
moment
the...
and I'll be right there.
Thank you so much, Mika.
Merci
Yes, I lost a screen today, and so I'm not very organized, it seems. So I'll just go on and speak for just a moment. And I think one of the questions that we wanted to ask to you is, what challenges have you faced in getting partners to align around a vision or objective? And we'd be delighted to hear if there's any responses in the chat box, or if you want to raise your hand, if you've had a difficulty in terms of getting people to align around a vision or objectives. And I would give just a second to see if anyone would like to respond, to take the floor. And if that's not the case, I would just move on to the next slide and just talk for a moment about what we want to cover in power dynamics. Now, some of these tools you don't necessarily think of when you're thinking about dealing with power dynamics. But for example, visioning is very important for clarifying and shifting values to build consensus. Using the causal analysis, which I will touch on today, around how to prioritize and identify the stakeholders to solve problems so they understand their own contribution to problem solving. We also use a method called multi-scale nesting of targets. And this is about bringing priorities across scales, which helps partners see their contributions as well. And then lastly, we'll just touch on some principles of power dynamics around inclusive and functional relationships. So in the next slide, I just want to describe visioning. Visioning is our method for collaboratively developing a compelling vision of a preferred future. And it is the first step for developing a powerful strategy for identifying interventions, services, policies, and partnerships that you want to develop to get to that future. So in the steps for defining a vision, these may be a little bit different than we usually discuss, but we start with defining the context, so the theme and the time frame of the vision. Then we actually look at our desired outcomes based on multiple dimensions that are relevant to the theme or the context. So for example, in an agri-food system or resilient food system, you would have social, cultural, productivity, institutional, environmental, and economic. And within each of those dimensions, then you can describe the outcome that you desire, or all the participants can describe the outcomes that they desire. And then you look across all of those desired outcomes and you identify, well, what will we have to have in place to both support and to sustain those outcomes. So we just have one example in the next slide. So here you can see, for example, this is just an example about describing the elements for a district level agri-food system. And so you can see you would have perhaps multiple outcomes under each of the dimensions. And then you look across those dimensions, and in the pale green, you would identify what has to be in place to support that, and then what would have to be in place to sustain that. And this is really important because we know that really to sustain things, the ecosystem has to be functioning. You know, the governance has to be very good, and also people have to be thriving in their livelihoods. So that is, there are just a few things I wanted to mention about the next slide. So you can take all of the language that you develop with the stakeholders, and then you can actually craft a vision going forward. And so then it becomes much more, let's say, friendly, but people can see their opportunities to assist. And one of the things about getting to that vision is in the next slide, you can actually tease out some of the policy aspirations that you're going to want to work towards. So for example, multi-stakeholder platforms that are working at district level are actually involved in the decision-making and in the implementation of policies. So this is why we think that the visioning is very important. And in the next slide, I just remind that, that it can help people to articulate their aspirations and diminish the competition among the objectives. And it can lead to deeper engagement of the actors with diverse objectives. And as I mentioned at the beginning, shifting the values. We find that even the research says that once we get a very solid vision, we can shift the values of the people in the program. And last but not least, it makes you look into the long term. So the next set I would like to just speak to, we didn't get a chance to touch on this last time, is causal analysis. And I'll be quite brief, and there'll be much more in the toolkit about this. But in causal analysis, what we do is we take the main barriers that are in the way of getting to that vision, of getting to those objectives. So I'm just sharing an example of water scarcity. And on the bottom, you can see that we've identified the causes, but also looked at the root causes. What is underneath the causes of water scarcity? And if you look closely, you find that there are some that are biophysical, there are some that are social, there are some that are institutional, as well as political. So this is really very, very useful for getting people to identify all the different aspects that have to go into problem solving and the different roles. So I think with that, I would just say that it's very useful to use a causal analysis to link objectives and prioritize the actions, understanding who has to be at the table, what has to be done, and prioritizing actions, because we know there's so many things we can be doing in terms of our project work. So then I would move on and ask a quick question, and that is this is on the new topic now. Within your project targets, I'm looking at our M&E people and our project coordination teams, our field people. Are you reporting the outputs of your projects into, for example, district or national level frameworks? For example, at the national level, your NDCs, the SDGs. And I just wanted to see if anyone is actually reporting their project data into the into district or national or higher level international goals. Do we have anybody who's reporting at other levels besides just the project outputs? I would love to hear from someone. I'm very patient. My colleagues?
Est-ce que vous faites dans vos rapports les contributions?
Do you include reports at national levels, at the global level?
No, maybe not. Anyway, let's come back to that, because I think it is something that we will want to think of in the future. So maybe I just explain a little bit about why we think this is important. So it's really, the value of this, of course, is to link the priorities, targets, and goals across different scales. And we use it because it is a mechanism to highlight contributions going in different directions. And what we have found is that when you do this, you can get individuals and institutions to see their contributions, but also we have found that powerful actors, when they see that what's happening at the district level is contributing at the national or even to the commitments at the international level, they often will agree then to go forward with those priorities. So it's a very useful tool for that. And so just as an example, what we do is we would, in the next slide, we would have, for example, the local level objectives at the bottom you see, and the national level objectives and how that might feed into the regional economic system or to our Agenda 2063 for the Africa Union and further into our international bilateral, multilateral agreements. So with that, I think that we have several examples of this that we will share also in the toolkit. So I'd like to...
Oui, plusieurs personnes ont rapporté.
We have a lot of people who reported contributions in Niger to the national level. In Burundi, it appears to be at the local and national level. And in Burkina Faso, they report at national levels. I would like to thank those people who have responded.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. No, it's absolutely wonderful. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes on negotiating power dynamics in terms of the principles. So we want to be able to negotiate these power dynamics among our stakeholders to have these functioning relationships. And what we have noted here is that there are multiple ways in which power dynamics emerge. For example, hierarchy, where you may have an official leader who is playing a more powerful role and the rest may not get the opportunity to really engage. You may have competing objectives. Sometimes this happens between different sectors as well as different institutions. You may have a mismatch of available resources. So we find often that when private sector, especially some of the larger private sector, or sometimes even with donors, when they're in the room, they're playing a different kind of power because they have the resources. And of course, barriers that are related to gender, ethnicity, and age, which we will speak more about in just a moment, and personalities, of course. We've all seen personalities, levels of confidence, and behaviors of different stakeholders can result in these power dynamics. So in the next slide, we just want to say, why do we do this? We think it's really important to understand the context, the specific context where you're having to negotiate the power dynamics, and that you have some principles in place that help you both prevent some of these dynamics in emerging, but also being able to deal with disruptive behavior that happen right in a room, perhaps with people. And we know that from the last time Mika presented on the power dynamics influence mapping, that this can also come very much in handy in terms of doing some preventative work related to this. So I did have one other question that I wanted to ask, and that is, what power dynamics have you been able to overcome in your project, and how? And I think I'm really appreciative of the people that are giving us these responses in the chat box. So what power dynamics have you been able to overcome in your project, and how? Okay, so I think we will we'll leave the chat box there for anyone who wishes to share. And I'm just going to mention a few things now about how to deal with power dynamics. And these again are principles, but we've talked about the early considerations. How do we prevent? How do we preempt power dynamics? And of course, it's understanding at the outset who could negatively or positively impact your process or outcome. And we have found that establishing very clear principles of engagement collectively in our stakeholder processes, that once people have seen these and agreed to these principles of engagement, they're more likely to be committed to those. And then of course, it's useful to have anticipate the power issues and who may be best placed to negotiate. We also have the problem sometimes of disruptions in the next slide. Of disruptions. So we might be in a meeting and things are going well, but then we start to sense that there's some power dynamics at play. And we find that it's very important to have that protocol, those principles ready to remind people of the protocols that should be in place. Of course, we have to use bilateral conversations, what we often call shuttle diplomacy, working between two different stakeholder groups, and then having a third party that everyone has a strong rapport with and respects to help in terms of mediation. And we've also found that having very clear evidence presented in a very clear way is very useful for getting these dialogues to be more equitable, let's say. And in long-term change, of course, this is what we're always working towards, but it's a much deeper commitment to see long-term transformative change, but it's something that we all are working towards. I mean, for example, gender comes up as one of those. You can't just have sensitivity training, but I'd like Emily to please speak about her experience here.
Thank you very much for this introduction to power dynamics. As said before, gender dynamics are very important when we know that social-cultural norms sometimes do not allow women to participate or to benefit to everything that have to do with political and development projects. We will show you in the toolbox. The experience was conducted in Burkina Faso and Northern Ghana. We started a more innovative approach in order to address those challenges and to have a transformation approach as far as gender inequality is concerned. To do so, we started with a household survey, a participative household survey. We looked at decision-making processes and then monetary and non-monetary revenue creation or income creation. And then we submitted those proofs, the evidence in community dialogues with various support systems, visuals, and thanks to evidence on inequality and necessary changes as far as norms in various tasks or decision making in most households. This is a long-term approach. It's an approach that looks forward to mainstreaming evidence and to report them to village levels. This is just to give you an example of a different type of dynamics. Thank you.
Voilà, je vais demander à Mickey, voilà. Je vais moi-même partager mon écran.
Right, kindly let me share my screen this time around.
Merci. Donc, la prochaine session.
Yes, the next session is based. Thank you. This is a topic which was discussed in most consultations in various countries on advocacy processes that are quite important. You can see a summary. But maybe before we go deep into the contents and processes, can I kindly ask you to ask what advocacy means in your context? You can use the chat box and share your experience or translate what it means in your own context. What does advocacy means? This is very important for us in experience diversity. As far as definition is concerned, we have a lot. We have chosen one of the most comprehensive. That is a process, a deliberate process, which is used in order to change policies and practices, but also to take up reforms and to institutions, modify power relations, change attitudes, and also to ensure a greater impact of the project. It could be dedicated to decision makers, but also all the leaders of the private sector, as well as those whom opinions can influence decision-making, such as media, development agencies, and NGOs. We can see that in most countries, we have advocacy activities at different scales. For example, in Burkina Faso, the program took up some trainings at regional levels with chambers of commerce. We looked at everything that is related to sustainable land issues. In Tanzania, we have a lot of land management entities that are fully involved in that advocacy. For example, how to bring or mainstream women to those groups. And then we also have advocacy platforms for multi-stakeholder platforms with the use of radios, media, agricultural centers. In Nigeria, we have a lot of programs of radio. Even in Ghana, we have political engagement and advocacy at federal level. Sorry, this is rather in Ethiopia. In Malawi, we have roles of catchment areas of various management committees at different levels. In the toolbox, you have further information on that advocacy process and the way we organized it. It was done at various levels that follow one another. And we also included some tools. So at the external levels of that diagram, we can see tools that can help you implement or that can be applied to each of these objectives and steps. To summarize, we think that the advocacy process is a process that requires a very strategic system. So the development stage is quite important. It's important to identify the context, identify fundamental questions, risks, and political dynamics. And then we can have a lot of tools, such as the ones we shared, the system mapping, and we need to understand the complex nature how it is interlinked to different institutions and sectors. That is a policy analysis, which is also essential. This can help us in defining the real objective of the advocacy process. We can also look at the visioning tools that we've just discussed on, which are very important in order to build consensus on future vision. Another aspect that is quite important is to have some clarity on stakeholders and to look at who can bring about change, and especially what is the entry point in order to trigger the change. In the course of webinar 1, we saw that there is a lot of tools that are very relevant, such as stakeholder mapping and power dynamic mapping, decision cycle that we'll look at later on, and the influence of current stakeholders that can help them understand what public is to be influenced, and then we look at more details on that. In order to convince, we need to gather evidence. We need to look at the various evidence teams that can to push some changes. And then we can look at data and also examples, demonstration plots. This is the development stage. We also look at monitoring and evaluation or learning process, which is quite important because it's very important to have key indicators from the ongoing in order to trigger change in attitudes, beliefs, behaviors that can influence. This is quite important to take into account from the beginning of the definition of the process. Then, on the implementation stage, we do not operate in silo. We work better when we are united. We need to put in place strategic relations. That is very important. We need to identify alliances, to identify champions. We can use multi-actor or multi-stakeholder platforms in order to create an influence network. We also need to put up a budget and define the advocacy strategy. We need to identify results and activities. As you can see that we also have a tool for incidents or risks. And then we need to communicate, that is to craft more adapted messages to the target. It could be radio messages, it could be evidence walls. We will look at that. And then we need to put in place that choosing campaigns, lobbying, or field visits, visits to a minister, an advisor, media, gathering spaces, and political dialogue. What is more important is to assess in a more interactive, to assess project progress with various indicators that we need to take into account in that advocacy, to look at whether there are causes or consequences that are not expected.
So in a nutshell, this is what I had to do and to show you. Well, now I have a question. So what are some of the methods or techniques in terms of communication that you find more efficient to influence change, both at the political or institutional level? So maybe you can share your experience in the chat box. I will be very, very happy to read them. Of course, it's going to be very useful as we share experiences among the various countries. Now, I'd like to invite Constance once again to talk about the decision-making cycle.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I just want to mention one tool that we use quite often, and that is getting at point number 3, which is understanding who can make change and what are your entry points. And the tool that we use, if we could have the next slide, is this decision cycle. And so, yes, I must say that it sounds as what it is. So the decision cycle is very much about mapping out the decision cycle in terms of the how decisions are made. And so you can use a diagram then to understand the actions, the decision points, as well as flows of information. And so one of the things that we find is that it's very useful then if once you understand that even if it's an annual work planning and budget cycle, that it helps you to understand where your entry points are. So again, the importance here is the influence points. Where can we bring in evidence? Where can we bring greater stakeholder input or wider engagement? Where can we bring those M&E outputs or lessons that we can actually then influence so that we know we have a better strategy? So in the next slide, just some steps on how to design one. And this is starting by just clearly understanding the policy objectives that you have and how the goals are decided, particularly if you're working within a government policy framework. And then just drawing and describing the main elements, whatever the appropriate time frame is. Often it's an annual or a 5-year kind of strategy that you want to embed your work into. And then showing where implementing partners, stakeholders, and others can interact, as well as evidence. And then, of course, adding in where those key financial resource decisions are made or allocations are made. And then add sort of where the M&E cycle can link. And just as a quick example in the next slide, I would just share that, that an example from Kenya. And so for this is, you're seeing an example of the actual strategy formulation and analysis process, which the government has a very clear strategy. And the reason we're using Kenya here is because, and Mika is taking the lead on this, is how to work within that strategy once the government has agreed to develop an agroforestry strategy for the government. So we're matching how to get the strategy in by using the government's own process. And so this is quite successful because the government sees how it is embedded in their own process. And so with that, I turn it back to Emily. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Constance. Merci. Donc, un autre...
Thank you very much, Constance. So if we want to understand the influence of the various stakeholders, I would like to talk about something which I think is quite important. First, we need to understand the stakeholders that are influenced. It could be different people, it could be the farmers, the women, it could be national ministries. So that group of stakeholders that are influenced, you need to know what kind of influence that is applied on them. You can talk about the different practices of agroforestry, so on and so forth. At the ministry level, we can talk about the value addition to the various farms. Then we also need to look at the scale of influence. Will it be at the processing level, at the exploitation level? Will it be at the national level or at the landscape level? Then we also need to understand who is influencing people, who would be influencing farmers, for instance. Usually, there will be NGOs, there will be agricultural leaders, it will be extension workers, it could also be scientists, NGOs, technical agencies at the ministry level. So depending on who is influencing and who is being influenced, we will use different types of tools. We can be using, for instance, policy briefs that are based on evidence for ministries, and for farmers, you can also use some practices on the field, or you can use some practical techniques. Now, it's important also to understand who is our target audience. Now, you also need to understand what is our mindset, what is their understanding of advocacy. Based on that, you will know the different tools that you need to use in the advocacy process. is important also to know what is their knowledge, and the knowledge definitely influences the beliefs system. Another thing which is quite important is to know what are the issues that are quite relevant to the target audience. It could not necessarily be issues that are particularly related to your topic, but it could be an entry point to get the interest of the target audience. So these are some of the elements that I think are quite important before you start influencing people. So perhaps now we're going to have Nikki still sharing a screen.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Thank you, Emily. So I'm going to go through session number 3, which is around communicating and integrating evidence into policy processes. So this came up as an important area in many of the interviews. For example, in Niger, there was the challenge of working with some of the universities and research institutes and having the information come into the policy process at a speed that was necessary. And in a number of the other countries, some other critical elements around integrating evidence into the decision-making and policy process. So this section is around bringing a culture of evidence and addressing issues with data sharing to allow for cross-sectoral evidence to be collected, organized, and presented in compelling formats to try and build trust and to influence policy. So we have a number of tools and approaches that can be used in this particular part of the toolkit, and we'll go through some of them today. So you can see the importance of building an evidence culture, of understanding the way evidence and information is flowing, how we communicate that evidence, and then we're going to give some specific tools like evidence walls and decision dashboards that can be co-designed to support in that work. So first we just have a question. If you could share an example of when you communicated evidence, information, data, and had a positive influence on a policy process. So if you can use the chat box and just any type of time that you shared, it could be a poster, it could be a field experience, a testimonial, and had an influence on a political process. We'll just pause for a moment so you get a chance to write something in the chat box. And maybe as we go through, you'll have some more ideas about what you might want to share. So within shared, we consider evidence to be the integration of raw data constituting numbers, words, images, insights, and they emerge from diverse knowledge sources. So from the community, from scientists, from development practitioners, from government. And this comes together to form the evidence. But when we're sharing evidence with decision makers, it must be accessible and interpretable, meaning they must be able to access it, find it, and they must be able to understand it. It must be applicable and relevant so that it actually applies to the decisions that they're trying to make. And credibility is very important so that they understand the source and they trust the source of that information before they'll be wanting to use it to make decisions. So as I mentioned before, evidence can come from multiple sources. We have scientific evidence, we have practical evidence, information, we have participatory and consultative evidence. Local knowledge is incredibly important. And this can be qualitative, looking more at the who, which, what, when, and why, or quantitative, which is more looking at the how many and how much. And all of these sources of information are very important, and often bringing multiple sources together can be very critical in decision making. But it's important to also acknowledge that decisions are not made solely on evidence and information. Decision makers are influenced, like all of us, by their worldview, how they're feeling that day, their well-being, the power that individuals have, their uncertainty, people's fears and confidence or overconfidence, their internal drivers, and just the way that they're seeing the world. And this is why bringing evidence in the most impactful way that you can and facilitating a process around it will make it more likely for it to be included, because we're competing against all these other elements that influence the way we make decisions. So another question, and I've seen a very quiet chat box, but I would love to see here if people have had any challenges in having their stakeholders understand the value and use of data and evidence. Yes, no. I'll wait for a moment to see if there are any responses in the chat box.
Est-ce que vous avez rencontré des goulets d'étranglement pour faire comprendre aux parties prenantes la valeur et l'utilisation des données? Est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui est facile pour vous, qui a été difficile?
Okay, so maybe we consider that as we continue. So the first thing we wanted to touch on was around establishing an evidence culture. Sometimes our main issue is that within institutions or organizations, maybe not ours, but the ones we're trying to influence, there's a lack of a culture of using and valuing evidence. So it's not maybe used in the decision-making process naturally, and there's often a lack of availability of evidence and a lack of understanding of its value. So we really need to promote an evidence-based decision-making. It's important to create this culture. And so that is an important starting point. And one of the ways that we can start on this culture of evidence, understanding and value, is looking at the flow of information, really understanding where it comes from, where it moves, how it's, what quality, what format. So this is an example from a nutrition study, and it looks at where the level of information collection, all the way from the household through to where it's held in the statistics department, for example. The format, is it handwritten, is it typed, is it online, how this data has been collected and how it aggregates. And also the quality and the quality checks, so that we really understand this data's quality and where it's been checked, and we can really feel like that is valuable when it comes to us to make decisions. So understanding where the journey of this data is a really important part of developing this evidence culture within institutions. And so obtaining and building relationships amongst diverse data sources and institutions is a huge challenge for many people. They know, often we hear people want to use evidence, they want to use data, but accessing it is incredibly challenging. It's kept in many places. It moves with the person who had a job. When there's a changeover, we lose data. So this is a big challenge. So one of the ways to go about this is first of all to consider and understand, it's like mapping out those stakeholders. Who has the data? Where is it? And what is the quality? Really understanding what we're looking for and what the potential is. And then developing a really compelling request. So sometimes if you go to an institution and say, we just want to use your data, they won't maybe understand why that is of value. But if you put a really compelling request of this data will be used in a bigger picture to influence this policy process or this government policy decision, and you can also reassure them how the data will be stored, the attribution, the sharing, etc. It creates confidence in data sharing. And also the third step is to understand the protocols within institutions. There are certain people that may hold data that we need to access before we can access the data. There may be an official process that needs to be undertaken, but that is really critical to getting the data to be shared. And then once the data is shared, we'll often find that it's at different levels, covering different things. There may be two versions of how nutrition is measured at different scales, using different indicators. So working with these stakeholders, you can see an example there of UNICEF, World Bank, WFP, working with all of these stakeholders and with the decision-making body. So in this example, it would be the Ministry of Health, to develop templates for standardization of how data is collected and shared, agree on the terminology and the classification, and also think about the scale. At what scale are these data being collected? And maybe we don't need to duplicate, we share the different scales. And what indicators are we using? So that there can be some alignment in the indicators for this data so that we can actually bring it all together and compare it and make a bigger story from this evidence. So another question, and I'm hoping the chat box is becoming more active. Sorry, my other question, when I get back to it, was, in which fora are you currently sharing your evidence or your monitoring and evaluation data or other sources of data that you collect? Because sometimes we're looking for evidence, but we may not also be sharing our evidence with others. So we really want to know, how are you sharing data from your project?
Mika, en attendant, je vois par rapport à la question sur...
Well, in the meantime,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't mind, Mika, we had some answers to the previous question. Someone from Burkina Faso said that data can be subjective and are not always reliable. Someone also said that sometimes the validity of those data is questioned, or it is difficult to validate data. So these are the two feedback that we received, and I would like to ask participants to answer the last question that has to do with the forum or mechanism which you use to share your data at the moment. Do you think that those platforms are available? Do you have, let's say, web platforms? Do you have any type of forum that you use? So maybe Miki will continue as you drop your answers.
Great, and I can see some answers going in there as well, so that's wonderful. And great points.
Yes, we also have community of practice.
Ah, yes. Great. So I wanted to move now on to, once we collect this data, once we understand the value of this evidence culture, once that's established, we then need to work out how we're going to communicate. So the next part is around communicating evidence. And this is finding ways to make it accessible, interpretable, and actionable. Back to those points we mentioned earlier about making it useful for decision making. And we do this to try and enhance the use of evidence in decision making, because we believe that the results will be more sustainable and impactful if evidence is used. So evidence comes, as we mentioned, in many, many forms, and we need to think about which forms are most appropriate for the audience that we're trying to reach and for the type of information that we have. So for some groups, photos or testimonials from the field are incredibly impactful. Sometimes for governments as well, this can be one of the most valuable ways to share a story or an experience from the field. We also have different types of graphs, box plots, radar charts, bar charts, tables, etc. In the research that we've done, there's often a preference for a simple bar chart or table because people feel more comfortable. But you may also want to use box plots and more complicated data displays so you can show the full picture of the data, but match it with other information so that it can also be understood. Maps, again, are a very important way of communicating evidence. People respond very intuitively to maps and find them very easy to interpret. But again, the quality has to be very secure before we use maps so that we can be sure, because it has an influence on the decisions that people are making. One tool that we use often is evidence walls. And these are really, really important because it brings the researchers, the development partners, the government and others together to discuss the data. So I remember in one of the interviews, there was the comment that moving data from the research institutions to be useful took a long time and maybe was not happening in the way that they would like. So these evidence walls can be really useful because you can ask the scientists to come and present, even if it's preliminary information, like initial data. You don't have to wait for a big report and expect people to read it. You can print these maps, these data onto walls and have the scientists and the development people explain it, discuss it, and say, what does this mean for us? There can be interaction, there can be interpretation, and around the implication. It's also really useful to show across, like biophysical, socioeconomic. So you have the social and the biophysical data, and you can talk about how they fit together rather than keeping these data sources in different groups. I'd like to bring a case study now on how you can integrate this data. So you've brought it, you've discussed it. How do we bring it into the decision-making process to influence policy? And there's a few steps here just to go through this example, which is from this project called Regreening Africa, which is working across 8 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, including Senegal, Niger, Mali, and the Sahel, and is looking around integrating evidence into decision-making. So the first step is around the stakeholder identification, which we've highlighted already. And once you have those stakeholders, designing an interaction, an event in which these stakeholders can come together. So making sure that we have a range of people from the community through to the high-level decision makers. And then in this case, we designed a template for a poster and asked all the NGOs, government, research to come and present their data, but using a template so that we made sure to include gender, to include successes, but also challenges, so that we could focus on that as well. And then number 4, we facilitated an event where there was interaction between different institutions, different individuals, different levels with that data, so we could have a conversation. And at step 5, we're ensuring that there's cross-sector section of stakeholders to discuss that data and to say, what does this mean in their context? Number 6, we agreed on the key messages that were coming from this data, coming from this wealth of experience within the countries. And at number 7, we summarized the challenges, opportunities, root causes, and use this data to, at step number 8, develop a roadmap. So in this case, it was a roadmap for restoration or regreening in each country, with a whole bunch of points that could be referred back to that came from the evidence as well as the other participatory exercises. The result of this in Niger was that there was a discussion on the need for coordination and a movement towards greater coordination and better policy situation for something called FMNA. In Ethiopia, there was agreement towards having an agroforestry platform, which has since been created. And in Kenya, there was the approval at the high levels of government to have an agroforestry strategy that is also now under development. Another really valuable tool is a dashboard, because a dashboard is an online web-based portal that can be easily accessed so that you can access different types of information, and that displays information from different sources. So it's across the sectors, it's across the institution, brings data together and visually displays it in a way that people can use for decision making. The one point to remember on dashboards is that it's very important that the people that will use the dashboard at the end are part of the design, so that we present the data and bring the data and present it in ways that is responsive to the audiences. So at this moment, I would like to stop sharing my screen and hand back over to Constance, I believe, unless there are any questions to go into the group work.
Emily, do you want to introduce the group work?
Oui, je
Thank
vais
you.
le faire, merci.
Thank
Ok,
you.
merci.
Yes, I'll be very pleased to do that.
Est-ce qu'il y a des besoins de clarification ou autre?
So in the meantime, I would like to know if you seek some clarifications. Maybe you can drop them in the chat box.
En attendant, je vais vous expliquer
And perhaps
comment
I'll not start by explaining how the group will be organized.
on va faire deux groupes.
So we are going to have 2 groups.
Divisés de la façon suivante.
So we're going to follow the
Burundi et Niger vont rester ensemble.
model that I will mention. Burundi
Vont aller avec moi dans une
and Niger will be together, and Senegal and Burkina Faso will be together.
Dans la première partie, on va définir les
There will be 2 parts,
en matière de politique.
15 minutes each. First, we'll talk about your policy aspirations and
On va voir quelles sont
the
les
key
pour communiquer ces données
data that you need.
processus politique.
And secondly, we will talk about the strategies that you can use to share or to communicate this data. That will help us eventually to talk about engagement and the various ways of engaging everybody. in the meantime,
nous puissions nous mettre dans des groupes. Je vois qu'il y a plusieurs messages. Ok, je vois que
I see that we have several messages. Looks like the Burkina Faso team has to leave in the next 15 minutes. Well, thank you for letting us know. So there are 2 persons from the Burkina team who won't be able to participate in the group work. So in the meantime, do we have any questions? Are you seeking any clarification before we break into groups?
Sinon, profitez-en pour vous étirer parce qu'on va avoir besoin de beaucoup de vos idées pour remplir.
Otherwise, you can stretch your legs, you can get ready because we are going to need each and every one of you very alert to finish this work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Des demandes de clarification?
Any clarifications? Some few aspects we would like to share. Let's wait a few minutes before this happens.
Okay. Je vois que certains ont des problèmes avec leur.
All right, I see a few of you have challenges with the chat box. I don't know if that is the case for everyone.
Voilà, donc vous allez recevoir une invitation pour rejoindre.
Okay, you will receive an invitation or a notification to join one or the other group. Kindly click on the invitation and I'll meet you there because I'm going to leave this plenary. See you there in a few seconds.
Uh-oh. All right, that didn't work out so well.
But we're cozy, you're 3 of us.
It's okay,
Yeah.
okay. I'm going to send Emily to the other group.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I
Thank
can't.
you. Wait, no, I think, yeah, I have to go to breakout room. Lord have
Oh,
mercy.
It's quite strange. Okay.
We've lost Niger and Burundi.
But we've
Now
got
we have
all the
Try to
presenters.
breakout room without me. Can I just leave this room and you add me?
I don't know
Yeah.
how to add you. Let's leave. I'm going to leave too and go back and ask him what happened, okay?
Yeah, I think we can all leave, huh?
Mm.
Yeah.
Leave them? Leave the room? Okay.
Yeah, leave the room. Serge.
Excusez-moi, moi, I don't have the option to go to the other room. Like, I've been assigned to this one.
I think Serge is here. Serge.
I left with no moderators. Serge, excuse-moi.
Serge.
En fait, je peux pas me mettre sur la breakout 2. Je n'ai pas le choix. Oops.
Serge, I think, yeah. Emily needs to
Yeah.
go to the other. Let me send him a message.
Est-ce que vous pouvez dire à mon groupe que je serai là bientôt? J'arrive.
She's gone. Okay. You're muted, Constance. Oh, she's back.
I tried, but I was alone in my breakout room.
Émilie, il y a Serge qui demande de vous connecter sur le canal anglais ou français pour l'entendre.
Ah, d'accord, ok. Merci. Serge, vous m'entendez? Are you hearing me, Serge?
Serge est sur le canal français.
Ok, voilà. Voilà, je vous entends. Désolée, il faut que je retrouve mon groupe. Je vois que Moussa, vous êtes aussi dans mon groupe. You're in my group, Moussa.
Moussa est en train de partir.
Ah, Moussa, il faut m'emmener avec vous.
Bon,
Je suis coincée là.
Ça allait me faire plaisir, mais dommage. Je suis en train de partir. On a une réunion à 14 h.
Ok, oui. Voilà.
You're speaking on mute, Constance, I think.
Thank you so much. And I think now we have our team from Burundi and Niger. And Soledad, where are you located?
In fact, I work for FAO. I'm actually located in Ecuador, so I'm quite far away.
Oh, you and I are on the same time zone. I just want to make sure that we have interpretation if people are on the French channel. Everything is okay?
Oui, c'est bon. C'est bon,
Okay.
oui.
Superb. Okay, then just to get us started, I'm really grateful to my colleague Stefano, who is going to share his screen.
Okay.
And we have the opportunity now to get a little bit more into detail around the work of Burundi and Niger. And of course, we have been building on the interviews that we had. And so with your patience, we will go country by country, back and forth. And so may I just start with Burundi. I think you have a very new situation in terms of your combined ministry that you're working with. And I believe you have mentioned that you're looking for ways to simplify communication, to get information into different political strategies. So maybe if we start in the top box, Burundi, would you be willing to share your policy aspiration, the change that you're wanting to see as a result of the work that you're doing now in the policy process? So may I ask Dieudonné or Donatien?
Dieudonné, Donatien, est-ce que vous pouvez...
Yes, we are here.
Would you be willing then to describe a bit about your policy aspiration, the change that you want to see in the institution?
Quelles sont les que vous avez concernant les institutions politiques, les changements que vous voulez?
Oui, je peux parler, c'est Dieudonné, je peux parler spécifiquement.
Yes, I'm Dieudonné. I can speak specifically on my value chain aspect.
Okay.
Well, in Burkina, we do have a lot of market-related aspects. We do have a problem in terms of pricing and yes, pricing mainly of products from local production, and we have a strong kind of competition with foreign imported products.
Vient d'être substitué par les produits extérieurs.
So you are being influenced by the foreign product? Yes, indeed, we have a challenge at that level. But when we see in most cases, the quality is the same.
That's very interesting. So how does that translate into the kind of change you would like to see? For example, in a government policy at the district level? Can you continue on
Nous voulons
that?
que, à notre niveau, les produits locaux puissent
Yes,
être valorisés.
we want our local products to be valued because the competition with foreign imported products are highly influenced. But we look at the quality, we can see it's the same. So we want to influence policies and then to take into account an equal pricing with competition with the local products.
Thank you so much. May I invite Maru or Mahamadou to describe in Niger some of the changes that you would like to see? I noted from your interviews, you were hoping to have a better alignment of the national policies on environment and sustainable development, and that the influence is around the direction generale of water and forest. May I ask Maru or Mahamadou, please, to share from Niger? Hello, I can't hear you though, please.
Oui, peut-être
Mahamadou.
Mahamadou.
Yes, I'm here, Mahamadou.
Okay. Super.
Maybe Mahamadou because I wasn't there the last time.
Okay.
Mahamadou. Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, very well.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Oui.
We can hear you.
Mahamadou, can you unmute and just to make sure that we're hearing what you're telling us? Mahamadou, I think it's muted. Is it possible? Oh, we're going into chat box perhaps.
Mamadou, est-ce que vous pouvez parler? Le micro, il ne marche pas. Hein?
Mahamadou, I'm sorry, we can't hear you, but it would be really important to hear from you or Maru regarding the policy change you're most interested to make. Mahamadou, you've written also about promoting the value chain approach. Okay, I think then I'm seeing
He is writing.
in the chat box. I've just seen that. Okay. All right. So so maybe we move and ask just a quick question around the target audience for the change that you want to see. Burundi, you've mentioned that you want to shift the dynamic around the external, internal, or the import and local markets. And who would be the audience, and what kind of who would be the audience that you would like to see this change? Dieudonné.
Vous m'entendez maintenant?
Oui.
Can you hear me now?
Niger, s'il vous plaît, Mahamadou.
Oui, je peux aller.
Donc c'est le Niger maintenant, oui. Ok.
Oui, c'est le Niger. Ok.
Oui.
Donc, par rapport à la première question.
Yes, with respect to question one, As far as we are concerned, we are looking at promotion at value chain level, promoting value chain. Now, with respect to marketing,
de la commercialisation, donc nous souhaitons en tout cas.
yes, with respect to marketing, we would like to include a lobbying process between Niger and various neighboring countries. Lobbying process between Niger and its neighboring countries. In any case, in order to do some trade in products.
Okay.
Et aussi assurer l'organisation des
And
acteurs.
then also to ensure the organization of stakeholders that are included in the value chain. Engagement with stakeholders in the value chain. We want to organize the discussions or the involvement of stakeholders in the value chain.
Voilà, merci.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then, I'm sorry, interrupted a bit. Burundi, you said you want to have the wider public understand about the value chain aspect. Is there more to that? What is their current attitude?
Bon, l'attitude actuelle au niveau.
Yes, the current attitude in terms of disruption is at the level of consumers, especially in urban centers. People believe that local products do not have an acceptable value in terms of consumption because more especially it has to do with certification and the improvement of packaging for local products. So we need to target those local products right here.
So there has, okay, very good. So there really has to be a way to help people understand that that these local products can be obviously equal quality. And so the attitude is a bit more about import is better. And I appreciate your comment about the packaging. And then I just wanted to ask, though, is there also a government agency that you feel needs to also be influenced in some way related to this? For example, with the trade ministry.
Oui, c'est directement le ministère de l'Environnement et de l'Agriculture.
The Ministry of Environment, Agriculture, and Livestock. They need to understand there is a necessity to promote local products. So in terms of facilities or infrastructure for processing units for smallholder, smallholder farmers who are in cooperatives.
Oops, I think I lost the screen.
On a perdu.
But yes, please keep going. So is Stefano still with us? Stefano, can you share your screen again? And you're muted, please. And then while I see that you have this new Burundi, you have this new combined ministry. So are they also learning to work together around this topic?
Oui, effectivement, il y a aussi le ministère du Commerce.
Yes, indeed. There's also the Ministry of Trade. The Ministry of Trade. They are in charge of investment promotion. They can also facilitate private investors, be it for neighboring countries, investors from other countries, especially for issues related to product packaging, but also the Ministry of Energy, because in order to produce or to process, we need to have energy.
Exactly.
And then we need to look at also how to convey or transport those products in rural areas that are far from the cities.
Very good. Okay, thank you so much. And then may I come back to my colleagues from Niger and ask about who needs to be influenced. I find it quite interesting that both of these countries are working on markets and value chains. And I understand that you work very closely with the Director General of Water and Forests, but can you tell us who would be the target audience to change views and how are they currently thinking?
Ok, merci.
Thank you very much.
Vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
C'est bon, je peux aller?
Can I go on?
Yes, please.
Can I go?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ok, thank you. Je parlais tout à l'heure, en tout
Yes,
cas,
I think a while ago I was talking about the necessity to look at the questions of supporting value chains. If you take into account challenges, it is located at 2 or even 3 levels of the value chain. First of all, on the production level, when you look at the production level, as far as farmers, there's always a lot of insufficiencies in terms of inputs or supply of inputs. That is the first aspect at the first value chain levels. The second one is related to marketing, product marketing.
Yes.
Yes, on the products marketing, because after producing products, farmers are enabled to sell at relevant prices, good prices, because there's a lot of issues of brokers, middlemen. Those middlemen do fix prices at their own will, which does not really help the farmer who really are difficulties or challenges to do his product or to harvest his product.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the third level is the difficulties in terms of cross-border trade because of a lot of administrative bottlenecks that are faced by farmers throughout the journey or the transporting of their products. Now, another aspect is on processing, product processing, because as far as they are concerned, they say that there's a lot of lack of infrastructure for processing products. We have a lot of products and those products are perishable. So we need to have strong infrastructure in order to make sure the products are conserved or sustained throughout the processing chain.
Thank you for that. I
Yeah,
guess
you
what
said
I'd
the first
like.
level is
sorry.
production, and the
Wait.
second level, marketing. And then I saw difficulties in cross-border trade. Is it still part of marketing? Yes, please. It's part of marketing. And then the third one, as I said, was processing challenges. Challenges, lack of infrastructure. So the main challenge here is to make sure that we have more support or lobbying in order to improve those three value chain levels.
And may I follow up and just ask, who is most important to influence in this, to get this functioning value chain for you? Is it a government agency? Is it, can you
Yeah, the
help
first is the government agencies, the first, because there are 3 levels. The first level is the government agencies.
Okay, and which?
And the second level are the representatives of the community.
Okay.
Yeah.
And which ministry, can I ask, in terms of the government?
The Ministry of Agriculture.
Okay.
The first one.
Yes.
And there is the Ministry of Trade.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to invite you to speak in French for our other colleagues, if you don't mind. I know I'm the loner here who doesn't speak French. But now what I think would be extremely valuable would be to understand, I know too that in these projects we have an element of sustainable land management, of resilience of our food system. So we have talked a lot now about getting the market to be better for the national actors, for the local to national actors. So I'm just trying to think, what kinds of evidence? So I've moved on to now question 3. What kind of evidence do you think would be needed to actually shift some of the thinking? And I would come to my good colleagues from Burundi. What is evidence is needed to shift the thinking around the markets? What would be valuable to show to try and make a difference? May I ask? Dieudonné?
Premièrement, il y a les...
Yes, first of all, is the fact of having biochemical analysis that shows that the content of the local product is the same in terms of quality with the imported product, imported foreign products.
Oh, that's excellent. And is it possible to get that data?
Il y a des laboratoires qui sont...
There are laboratories. We have specialized laboratories capable of conducting it in Bujumbura, the capital city. They can do that in order to prove that the local and foreign products are the same in terms of biochemical, in the terms of taste and etc. We also need to have tasting kind of tests in order to show the same level of taste. We need to do that. And we also need to show that those products, when they are packaged just like foreign products, they are physically the same. They are the same as local products.
And may I also ask, I'm going to bring us back to the resilience question. Do you think it's important for people to see that some of these products are grown on land where you're doing sustainable land management for the country?
J'ai pas bien saisi la question.
I didn't get that
sorry.
well.
So that's my fault. I was just asking, because we have this sustainable land management, this resilience dimension, you know, the farmer field schools, etc. in Burundi. I was wondering, is it important to also show other kinds of data along with the nutritive content of the products? Do you want to also show that this is these products are coming from land?
Effectivement, il y a surtout pour
Indeed.
Pour les céréales.
As far as cereal products are concerned, we have cereals that are well adapted in terms of nutrition. There's necessity to show that products, cereal products, locally produced cereals are more nutritive in terms of values, especially for infants and children. And breastfeeding women, we need to show that those products are quite nutritive, even at household levels or villages.
Okay.
Or rural areas.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I apologize. I'm always looking for the interrelationship between the biophysical and the social. So that's why I asked the questions. And then can I please come to Mahamadou and ask a similar question of what do you think would be the most valuable evidence or multiple evidence that would help to make the case? I know, I'll let you proceed.
Ok, thank you very much. Et quand vous prenez, je
Thank you
vous
very
parlais
much.
tout à l'heure de la chaîne de valeur.
I was talking about value chain, and when we talk about value chain, it entails investments to be done in the value chain, and the end result is those investments have to be amortized. If we see, for example, the production levels, the farmer will have to buy a lot of inputs, which are to be used for the products. And then you need to have also a field or a plantation. When you look at the investment side of the farmer, and when you look at the price, the selling price is to be inferior to the investment products. So you can see that instead of producing to earn and to sustain the activity, the effect will be the contrary. But when we have external supports, lobbying, assistance, then when we have capacity building of that farmer together with facilitation in the entire value chain, you see that the farmer will have his capacities built, and we have to earn a lot throughout the facilitations, from the production to the marketing of the products, throughout the processing level. By conducting that analysis, you will see that it is quite easy to convince people to choose value chains and also the supports through the entire chain. So
Very
this is
good.
an example of evidence to consider.
Very good. Thank you so much. I guess
Thank
I'm
you.
still going to ask one more question because I know we have to create resilient food systems. And so I wonder about the relationship that you are making between the functioning of the value chain and the resilient land base. I know you're both working on this, so I did wonder if you're making that relationship. We have 5 minutes to go, and I would hear from
Okay.
both. If Giordone wants to give a response around the relationship in Burundi with the sustainable land management and the value chain.
Ok, donc quand vous prenez, quand on dit
Yes.
la chaîne de valeur,
I would like to comment on value chain. When you take value chain, it's an integrated approach. And as part of the integrated approach, all aspects related to resilience and environment, they're all taken into account. In other words, when you look at the production aspect, there are other capacity building processes that are conducted for the farmer in order to take into account the output, and also to consider climate change, not only for the sustainability of the system, but also throughout or for a more reasonable use of most inputs that are used in the production system. On the other aspect, in order to mitigate all the aspects of activities, we have related activities that are conducted in catchment areas treatment, and also the consideration of those environmental effects in all achievements, structuring achievements in the value chain. So these are various links that we need to look at in order to take it into the value chain.
Very good. Thank you for that. Did you have anything to add, Giordone, from the Burundi situation?
Oui, pour le Burundi, effectivement, c'est un contexte assez particulier.
Yes, in Burundi, the context is quite different. It's very particular when you see that the average in terms of production is between 0.2 and 0.5 hectares. You can see that there's a lack of space So in order to put both together, we do focus on the improvement of seeds with a strong productivity in smaller plots.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
So these seeds are very productive in smaller spaces.
That's quite interesting. That's quite interesting. All right, so maybe if we could take 1 minute.
Les pratiques d'agroforesterie.
I also wanted to
sorry.
talk about agroforestry practices because we don't have enough space for forestry. So what we do is we do catchment areas management in order to retain water, and then to insist on that.
Exactly, and I think it's very similar in Niger. I've had the chance to visit Zinder and Maradi to see the agroforestry systems there. Can we just move to the next slide? And if we don't have time to complete, I could just explain what we had hoped to talk about. We are very interested then about how to obtain this data and organize the data that would be most useful for making the case, for advocating for the change that you want to see, and for it to be targeted in a way, as Mika has mentioned, in the format that is most valuable to the decision maker. And then the second thing is then we would spend time on developing the key messages. And then lastly, we would actually like to visit with you about in what fora would it be most useful. For example, we showed the evidence walls. Is that a way to have people interact with the different kinds of data to sort of to provide information so that they can think about these activities differently? And I apologize, I think we're going to run out of time, but one of the things that I did want to share is that we would like very much to, following on this, our last seminar, to have an opportunity to speak with you in case you wanted to proceed to develop a bit more on an engagement plan for taking some of these tools forward in your science policy interface. So I don't know if anyone wants to add. I'm just afraid that the room may close before we finish. But please, if anyone wants to suggest some responses.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, please.
Yes, may I proceed, please?
Absolutely.
Niger.
No, allez-y, Burundi, allez-y.
Dieudonné?
Ok, c'est Dieudonné.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Dieudonné. In the case of Burundi, I think we need to use some results or some data available at the National Institute of Statistics. They have reliable data on agriculture. I also believe the Ministry of Agriculture has some reliable data which can help us to show that there is excessive production, and we can also start processing many of the things that we produce in our country. I also believe that when I talk of excess production, it is both in terms of quantity and in terms of quality.
Thank you for that.
Il y a aussi des unités de transformation naissantes.
We also have growing processing units. It is important to show that they are already producing something and they already have some of their products on the market. But we need to show that they need more marketing strategies and labeling strategies as well.
Labeling, yes. Excellent.
Et pourquoi pas aussi, il faut multiplier les
Moreover, I think it would be good to have more demonstration plots or even demonstration fairs. That will be an opportunity to show that we produce something good in our country. In addition to that, I think it is important to have the biocertification, particularly for honey products.
Okay.
If you allow me, I would like to add another point. I think that basically all that I said will be major steps to help us go beyond the borders of Burundi, which used to be the case in the past.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for the addition. And until they bring us back, I don't know, Mohamedou, do you want to add anything?
C'est qu'il faut multiplier les foires agricoles. C'est les foires au lieu des efforts, Stefano?
Please, Mr. Stefano, I think yeah, I was talking about the fairs. So please, yeah, you have to write it well in French. The word is foire. So can you hear me? I hope you can.
Yes. Yes, Mohamedou. I wonder now if the rest of the group is coming back to the main hall.
Yes, the rest of the group will be back in 20 seconds.
Okay. Mohamedou, please.
Yes, so for Niger, we have 2 institutes that will help us have data. Let's say the Ministry of Agriculture, and we have the National Institute for Statistics.
Thank you.
We have some surveys that help us to collect data, and we have some thematic studies on the value chain.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Merci.
Absolutely. And so I think that we're coming back to the main hall. I'm still not seeing all of our team members. Do we know what happened to our colleagues from Senegal and Burkina Faso, Emily?
I can see we've been joined by a few. I think we're getting them back. We have a few colleagues from Burkina. Il y a plusieurs collègues du Burkina, pardon, qui n'ont pas.
I think some colleagues from Burkina Faso had to log out. But I think no, we are all back to the room, so I think we can start.
Just want to thank our colleagues that were joined in the group that I was working in, and also give a thanks to Stefano for working with us in this capacity.
Okay, so I stop here.
Yes, please, so we can bring the screen down. Thank you.
Okay, so stop share screen. Okay.
Yes, please. Okay, I'm going to mute and over to you, Emily. Thank you.
Merci, merci à tous. Donc voilà, je voulais déjà inviter les participants.
Thank you, everyone. I would like to know if anyone has some questions or you have any feedback following the group work that was just completed. So maybe you can unmute your microphone and take the floor, or you can also write something in the dialog box, in the chat box. If there's anything you would like to say, feel free to add your comments in the chat box. This training is a tailor-made training. Looking at your needs, we can see that you are all involved at different scales. But before we proceed, I just wanted to ask you, what are some of the tools, some of the things that we mentioned in the course of this training that you envision using in your work? Do you think that there are some parts of this training, because we spoke about data, we spoke about power dynamics, we spoke about different aspects of this training. So do you think that there is any tool, there is anything that you would like to use in your work? Now, let's look at the next steps. For the FAO shared toolbox, we will have a good disaggregation of the methods, of the tools, and their practical application. Eventually, we are also going to look at how you can plan your engagements. We believe that this is an option. Our shared team will be available in the course of the upcoming weeks. And of course, if you would like us to work together on an engagement plan, why not? We'll be very happy to do that. So we're going to send you a form for us to know how you find this training, but also how we can assist you. Having said that, I would like to invite Stefano again for his closing remarks before we conclude this session. So Stefano, you have the floor. Are you still here?
Oh dear.
Well, apparently we don't have Stefano any longer with us. Perhaps we should wait a little. Let me check. Let me rely on Constance. Maybe you would like to give some closing remarks, Constance?
Of course, and Stefano and I did have a chance to interact prior, and I think that probably the most important thing is to recognize that this component, the science policy component of the RFS project, is very keen to continue to support ways of enhancing this interface. And so our dear colleague Lillian Goradema is now based in Zimbabwe, but she will soon join the RFS office in Nairobi, and she will be supporting full-time on this component. And so I understand that FAO is very keen to continue to support, and if we see the opportunity with you in building on the conversations that Emily has just mentioned about engagement planning. And Lillian, did you have any thing you would like to add? We want to make sure everyone knows you very well.
Hey, thanks, Constance. I think for me, I've been participating in the webinars more as a learning process for me to understand the country context, and it's been very useful for Burundi and Niger in their groups. So I think there are various themes which have come up which we can follow up and provide the necessary support. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Liliane. Merci à tous. Merci à tous aussi pour votre
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for joining. Thank you for this group work. It was really fruitful. I think we've been here for quite some time, but it was quite productive. The last thing I would like to ask you is to know exactly what you think about this training. What are the various sessions that you found more useful for your project, so you can choose as many answers as you find relevant. It is important to know what are the sessions that are more relevant. Is it the first one on stakeholders mapping, on how to improve the relation between the multi-stakeholders, the power dynamics, the one on advocacy, on communication and integration of evidence in the policy process. So we have more and more answers. I can also see that most people were interested in advocacy. Okay, so I think now we have the results. And then we have this final question, which we think can be indeed very useful. We have these online trainings that we organize, these webinars. How effective do you think they are? It is true that initially we were supposed to meet in Senegal and things would have been more different. Of course, it would have been a different atmosphere and all that. But, you know, we have to make do with the situation. So it's important that we hear from you. So you tell us how you find it. And yes, having said that, I'll stop sharing my screen. And I believe that if you are still connected, you can start your video so that we can see you. Right. So I hope we can see you. Please start your video. We are very grateful.
We're delighted to see Stefano back. Took the opportunity to just say underscore FAO's interest in promoting this work through the component. And Lillian also made some remarks. So thank you.
Okay, so I don't know because I was disconnected. I'm going to tell you about the final FAO remark.
Oh.
Yes, time.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Donc, je pense qu'il faut clarifier un peu comment le processus va continuer.
The process is going to continue. Today, if I'm not mistaken, is the last webinar, but I still want to buttress the fact that each component is really important. The purpose of this process is to improve the quality of dialogue between the scientists and decision makers, so that at the end of the day, everything is successful. This process is about providing evidence, as we said throughout the training. It is to help decision makers to understand how to use data. Data is key, and it helps to have a better planning, and data should be used by decision makers in their policies, in their programs at the national level. It is also important to define the role of each and every stakeholder. I think the methodology shared today is very useful. I believe that by now, as we have come to the end of this webinar series, you have a good understanding. I believe that it would also help you in the work you do in your country. FAO is committed to walk along with you. We are working together with équipes, and of course, if you need more assistance, be it remotely, because of the current situation, we will still be able and very glad to assist you in overcoming the challenges that you are facing in the various policy process. Of course, we are also there to help you collecting and providing reliable data. We also want to assist you in accessing the best practices and better understanding some regulatory frameworks existing in each and every country of the project. We also think it is important that through our work, you can achieve evidence-based decisions. At FAO, we are supporting your region in Africa for the establishment of multi-stakeholder platforms. So we also want to work on these evidence-based processes that we explain through these webinars. We will take into account your needs at the country level so that we can assist you efficiently. I believe many of your needs have been expressed through these webinars. Liliane is now joining us. She will be your focal person. She will help you, she will accompany you. And Anne-Sophie and myself will be coordinating everything here in Rome. I believe that through this webinar series, FAO will be able to strengthen relations with each and every country. We better understand your needs. Based on those needs, we will define some activities. We will continue to support you. We also know that the financial resources are mainly targeting regional training activities. We will also discuss with each country to know what are your national training needs. Once again, I would like to thank you for participating in this training. I want to thank the ICRAF team for the quality of their work and for this webinar series. Thank you so much. Thank you, Stefano, for your closing remarks and for the support you are ready to offer each and everyone. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Au revoir tout le monde.
Stay very healthy.
Au revoir.
Et vous allez recevoir un email. Au revoir. Bye bye.
Au revoir tout le monde.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Merci beaucoup.
À bientôt. Au revoir.
Au revoir.